First, I want to acknowledge that the presentation that I'm doing today is a collaboration with Rehab Nazzal. Rehab Nazzal is a Palestinian-Canadian multidisciplinary artist and scholar, is currently a professor at Dar Al-Kalima University in the greater Bethlehem region, and is really an acclaimed artist, the director of the award-winning film Vibrations from Gaza. If you haven't seen it, it's an amazing film about how deaf children experience war, as well as editing the book and contributing to the book Driving in Palestine. And her more recent book is Samud in Dark Times. Rehab is from the greater Jenin area, which is relevant for what I'm going to be talking about. And I also recommend if you to check out Rehab's Instagram, just because there's a lot of amazing images that are regularly posted on her Instagram feed. And her strength, she's strong in many art forms, but her particular areas that she specializes in are photography and film. So I'll be using the we in the presentation. And in this presentation, maybe before I go into that, what we're examining is the extension of the current genocide in Gaza to the West Bank setting, where since October 2023, over 1,000 people, including at least 230 children, have been killed, and over 7,300 have been injured. Specifically, we're focused on the systematic destruction of 2 refugee camps by the Israeli colonial forces in the north, the Jenin camp and Nur Shams. And we employ the term bulldozer colonial planning to capture the nature of this destruction, of which I'll say more in a bit. We further highlight resistance and resourcefulness of Palestinians, or a form of bottom-up resistance planning in the face of Israel's attempts at annihilation, and the geographies of responsibility that compel solidarity. So what we've referred to as bulldozer colonial planning has parallels to, but also diverges from, what some planning and architecture scholars, such as Meredith Kaur, describe as bulldozer urbanism. According to Kaur, this can be understood as demolishing large swaths of urban areas that are deemed blighted or slum-ridden. This approach has led to the displacement of residents and destruction of cultural heritage, which resulted in the term, and via often the use of the bulldozer, which is why it results in the term bulldozer urbanism being coined, and particularly in the 1960s. The term is associated with urban renewal initiatives, particularly in inner cities of the West, but also the ways in which these kind of urban renewal similar activities have spread globally, involving the demolition of housing complexes, often high-rise public housing, deemed in decay due to a lack of maintenance and services. Bulldozers, which were previously used to pave roads and transport artillery, became machineries of destruction. Actually, they've been part and parcel of that since their inception. The ideological justification for such initiatives were to improve the quality and appearance of the built environment, and to modernize or redevelop housing for the quote unquote future benefit of the residents. In practice, urban renewal would lead to large-scale displacement of low-income residents, predominantly communities of color, and disrupt their social connections, as well as leading to the loss of cultural and heritage institutions. As noted on the slide, it's been mainly a state-led or state-coordinated kind of drive. So, like Urbanism, the concept of bulldozer colonial planning encompasses not just the destruction of lives and economic livelihoods, but the general conditions that make life possible, the social fabric, spaces for livelihood, as well as support networks, cultural heritage, and physical infrastructure. However, it has some distinctive features as well. In contrast to bulldozer urbanism, there's a colonizing power rather than the state playing the central role in the destruction. The colonizer has the goal to further entrench control over the land and the people inhabiting it. As well, there's no pretense or ideological justification of future improvement for the residents. The camp represents what Abu Rahma calls the material form of the colonial relation, a tangible form that makes visible the power dynamics of settler colonialism. The aim is therefore an obliteration of the camp, rendering it uninhabitable for those they deem threatening to the settler colonial project due to their anti-colonial resistance, their potential to resist, or simply their continued presence. In the context of the refugee camp in Palestine, there's an added dimension. Its existence is defined by a tension between its durability and its transience, while the camp today resembles a neighborhood with houses, street markets, and basic services. It is physically and politically distinct from the nearby conurbation, and for camp residents, it represents temporary housing until the refugees' right to return to their place of origin is realized. The camp embodies an enduring attachment on the part of refugees to the place from which they or their parents or their grandparents were displaced in 1948. There's often symbolism in the camps, such as street names or artifacts that link to the camp to that place of origin. Therefore, attacking the camp does not only imply the physical destruction of the urban fabric, but it threatens to remove the symbolic foundation of the refugee identity and status, to eliminate the refugee narrative and the right to return to their homes and lands from which they were forcibly displaced. And just as one example of the symbolic significance, in this image here, which shows bulldozers and a raid in Jenin, in the background, you can see a sign that says Haifa Cafe. And that's because many of the residents of the Jenin camp hail from the nearby city of Haifa, from which they were displaced in 1948. So it just gives you one example of that. The Palestinian camps not only mark the standing of the Palestinian as a refugee, but the refugee issue as an international responsibility. All Palestinian refugee camps are managed by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, as it's often known by, an agency that was established in 1949 with the UN General Assembly Resolution 302, specifically to support Palestinian refugees in the Near East who were displaced in 1948, including having the responsibilities of the provision of healthcare, clean water, sanitation, education, and other social services, as well as job programs. In addition to operating in Palestine, they operate in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. So bulldozer colonial planning, as we're discussing it here, can be considered a form of herbicide, essentially the killing of a city, which a number of people, have written about. But bulldozer colonial planning, as we're using it here, we're you want to utilize it because the term bulldozer, the use of bulldozer, both its importance materially and symbolically establishes the link between the settler colonial dynamics within Palestine and the global north, to which I will also return. Okay, so now I want to talk a bit about the two camps that I was referring to previously. There are camps that are situated in the north, and you see the line demarcation of the West Bank. And so the circle, there's a circle around the two camps, and this is just zooming in to here. In actuality, UNRWA oversees 19 refugee camps. And so these are two of the 19 in the West Bank. The Jenin camp was established in 1953 on the western edge of Jenin city. And it is the largest of the camps. It has a population, or had, as I'll come back to, it had a population of 23,000. And as mentioned, was home to many of the refugees who hail from the nearby city of Haifa. It has the highest, or had, I guess, the highest rate of unemployment and poverty among the 19 camps. It's also a site that's had a long history of confrontations between the occupation forces and resistance fighters, what members of the Israeli occupation forces have called the hornet's nest. In 2002, during the Second Intifada, there was a sustained 10 to 11 day raid of Jenin camp, an extensive raid, where more than 400 structures were destroyed and around 4,000 people, more than a quarter of the camp, were displaced. According to Linda Tabar, who has a really interesting article about the camp and its reconstruction in the aftermath of that raid, the reconstruction by UNRWA actually led to a widening of many of the roads in the camp, with some of the main roads being widened to about 7 meters and some of the side roads widened to about 4 meters. So this is significant in the camp's kind of morphology. Historically was more, like a kasbah kind of form. And that meant actually that it made it very difficult for tanks to enter and maneuver. So the redevelopment plan and the actual redevelopment outcome would be quite controversial. Many camp residents were feeling, they felt left vulnerable to future Israeli attacks and incursions. Nur Shams, which is the other camp, I'm gonna wait. Nur Shams, which is the other camp, was established in 1952. And it too, like Jenin, is an urban camp. It's just to the east of Tulkarem city, with a population around 13,000. High levels of unemployment, overcrowding, and limited service provision are some features of the camp. And it also was a site, and had been a site where there was an active group of resistance fighters. These two camps were camps that Rehab and I visited together in the summer of 2004. And they're camps that Rehab has visited both before and after that time, in addition to Tulkarem camp. Those are the three main northern camps. In the summer, when we had visited shortly after each of the two camps had faced an assault. In the case of Jenin, we visited the day after there was an assault. And in the case of Nur Shams, it was within hours after the tanks and the bulldozers retreated and didn't actually leave the area, ended up going to Tulkarem camp at that time. This was in July of 2024. So what I want to show you are some of the images that Rehab, this is going to be a mix of some of the images that Rehab has taken, but also some that I took as well. So it'd be a mix of both, just to give you a sense of what the impacts of the invasion at that time. So this is from Jenin. And one of the significant kind of impacts from the invasion was the destruction of roads. In the case of Nur Shams, so this you can see some of these, some of this destruction, both of structure and roads, but there was actually the entirety of the main road to enter in and out of the camp was torn up. This is actually within the camp setting. This is one of Rehab's photos. I'd forgotten to add the name. These are images of some of the homes that were destroyed. And one of the things about Nur Shams is that it's quite dense. And as you could see, there's a kind of verticality to the structures, to the homes and the buildings. So even if, for instance, there might be the top unit of a building that's targeted, you know, there's all these ripple effects, right, in terms of the destruction. In the next image, you see to the left here the main road of Nur Shams. And it's significant because there's also a lot, not just because it's the main entry into the camp, to access the camp, but there's quite a number of shops and services all along this main road. To the right is the Jenin camp. And actually, I need to qualify something about this image because there is a bulldozer in this image. But this bulldozer was not a bulldozer that was brought into attack. It was actually people. And as you'll recall, we entered Jenin the day after the attack. This was people already trying to clean up and to reconstruct their own structures, and homes, and to clean up things. So, so you get the sense here of the wider roads in Jenin, but even these wider roads, you see both partial and, as the next image shows, even more full subsequent raids, more of the full destruction of what were paved roads. The other thing that we witnessed when we were there was the puncturing of water lines and exposed sewer systems. We saw water tanks that were riddled with bullet holes. And we also saw destruction and the defacement of some of the local iconography. This was a plaque in honor of Shireen Abu Akleh. Does anyone know who that is? What's that? The journalist, good. Yeah, that was the journalist. And the journalist was killed in Jenin refugee camp, near the entrance of the camp. And so there's always been efforts to, to have a memorial, and there's continuous efforts to destroy the memorial, and then it's replaced, and it just goes in that fashion. So there's, I just want to show you in the next image. Here to the far left is the tribute, and that's actually the site where she was shot and killed. But if you were to be up closer to that tribute, you would see bullet holes that it's been shot up as well. And both residents and Rehab were talking about the challenges of having to constantly. In the middle, you see an image of a martyr as well. There's a lot of tributes through posters and imagery of the martyrs, and also shot up. And you see bullet holes in the building structure as well. And then to the right is one of the local shops or services, and we frequently saw this. These are all Jenin, just to give the context as well. And so there's this demarcation of the Star of David to say we were here in this site. Oops, actually, so before I go and, oops, very sensitive. Okay. So we were quite horrified by the scale of the destruction that we witnessed. It included dozens of bombed and burned homes, shops, and services. Many of the shops and services that we visited had, even in the interior, you could find bullet holes along the walls. There was the damage also of daycares, a gym, an UNRWA center. In addition to the infrastructure damage I had already mentioned. And a key mechanism of this destruction was the Caterpillar D9 armored bulldozer, which until recently had its head office in the greater Chicago area, but is now based in Texas. And maybe as an aside, I'll just mention something about myself, since I haven't situated myself in all this. But so I'm of Palestinian origin. My parents are from Palestine. My mother is from Bethlehem, my father from Jaffa. And I was born and raised in Chicago. And so that's why I feel it's particularly significant that it's not lost on me, the entanglements and the contradictions that of my own identity. We use the term bulldozer here as a metaphor for the tearing down of the urban camp communities, which is carried out through a multi-pronged attack. So it's used both in terms of materially, again, and symbolically, for the multi-pronged attack that involves not only the use of bulldozers, but also drone surveillance, aerial bombardment, and ground assaults with tanks and snipers. So with these images, we just wanted to give you a sense of some of the destruction we witnessed, but we also want to talk about some of the bottom-up forms of resistance, or what could be understood as resistance planning. That took many forms. So I think what's great about the image to the left that Rehab took was the ways in which, for instance, people in the camp would construct from whatever they had, available roadblocks to try to bar the entry of both the bulldozers and the tanks. The use of improvised explosive devices, some of which were successful in, blowing up a tank, for instance. To the right, one of the things that you see is, well, there's a couple things you see that I want to speak to. One things you see is that there's a tarp at the top. That was in the context of Nur Shams. In Nur Shams, we found a lot of tarps, and the tarps are utilized to block the drone surveillance. And especially in the narrow corridors, you would find more of them. It's also significant because you see the children here carrying a flag, and that is the Mohawk warrior flag. That was actually a gift from Katsisakwas Ellen Gabriel to the people of Palestine. She asked that it be delivered and shared with the people of Palestine in solidarity with the struggle. If you don't know, Katsisakwas Ellen Gabriel is an indigenous elder from Genesataki, an activist, an artist, and also an artist in her own right. Those were some of the kinds of ways in which people in the camp were resisting, but most also significantly was the community bonds that the camp had, and the community networks and the modes of the exchange and supports, mutual supports. One of the things that we found was when we ourselves would be going into various shops, for instance, many of those shops, even along the main street that was damaged or the one in Jenin that you saw earlier, would serve as hubs. Constantly people coming in and out, serve as sites of information exchange, information flow. It was also, where a lot of things, resources are shared depending on whatever the shop would specialize in. And so I think that's also, really important to underscore and has been critical because at the time we had visited the Jenin camp, which again was July 2024, it had already been invaded 80 times since October 2023. So it's a continuous cycle of these attacks, and one's, and not knowing when that would happen. And so having those community networks and, forms of mutual aid provision already kind of, well established has been critical. So after I visited in the summer, and we visited in the summer of 2024, but Rehab had gone a number of times, after that as well. One of the things that would happen was that in January of 2025, there would be an intensification in terms of the attacks by the Israeli occupation forces in what they would call Operation Iron Wall. Operation Iron Wall would start in January 2021 of 2025 in Jenin camp, and then it would spread in February to Tulkarm and Nur Shams. And basically, at that point in time, it's hard to probably recall this given everything that's been going on and is going on at the moment, but there was a provisional ceasefire that was called in relation to Gaza. And so there were a lot of tanks and munitions that had been redirected from there. So, and in this case, with regards to this operation, rather than the army entering and leaving after a short duration, as was the case with all the other raids that had occurred, it has involved a sustained presence and siege. In Jenin alone, more than 40 have been killed and 600 homes demolished, and already within 6 months of Operation Iron Wall. After the start of the assault, around 30% of Jenin refugee camp was destroyed, and 35% of Nur Shams was destroyed. Over 40,000 people have been displaced from across the three camps by the middle of the year. But since that time, and there was a suspension of UNRWA services, and since that time, all the residents of both camps have been evicted, of the camps we visited. The camps remain under a military siege and Israeli forces are stationed inside. The destruction of the structures within the camps are ongoing. According to a military official, the goal with this operation is to preserve the IDF's freedom of operation. The method, preventing the reconstruction of homes and roads that were destroyed. Will turn the camps from fortified strongholds into urban neighborhoods. So again, essentially annihilating the camp as a political and physical space. This is an image Rehab took in 2025, and what it shows is the way in which, all the mud and the slabs have been kind of used to block access to the entrance to the camp. And at the moment, a lot of people are looking on to the campsites that were displaced from hilltops and just observing and waiting. And we could talk more maybe about what happened to some of the people that were evicted from, forcibly evicted from the camps in the question and answer period. So in many ways, the outcome of the Bulldozer Colonial planning as it relates to the camps is campicide, a form of herbicide that aims not only to obliterate the physical landscape and infrastructures of resistance, but to undermine claims of a right to return. Camp residents would refer to their respective camps as the mini Gaza or small Gaza. With annihilation of infrastructure from which local resistance is being waged, physical, social, and symbolic infrastructure, now more than ever, there's a need for international mobilization. But it's not just the camp that has been coming under attack. It's also the entire UNRWA agency that has been heavily targeted. Recently, there's been the destruction of the UNRWA headquarters in Jerusalem. Also, you see notably here, the bulldozer, caterpillar again, part of a broader attack on refugee standing and support. To quote the UNRWA Commissioner General, this quote is from just maybe 10 days ago, UNRWA does not have a political mandate. However, UNRWA itself is politically fraught, which again, we could talk about, but nonetheless, at the moment, has been providing, these essential services. However, to quote the Commissioner General, its registration of refugees and archives documenting their historical displacement are intrinsic to protecting Palestinian rights in final status determinations. This is why eliminating the agency became an explicit objective. And goes on to say how such an elimination aims to weaken Palestinian rights within, again, the final status kind of issues. So the Commissioner General is explicitly calling this out, that this is one of the aims of the attack. So we use the bulldozer kind of concept, or the figure of the bulldozer, as I previously mentioned, as a through line, or even a thread, one could say, to connect the settler colonial dynamics in Palestine with the global north. But as we pull on the thread, a complex web implicated in a spatial infrastructure of dispossession emerges. So just to give you a sense of some of the range of other bulldozers that you find in operation, bulldozers that are not only used in the attacks on the camps, but also the attacks of houses and infrastructure across Palestine, and for the building of settler roads, settler communities. So it's implicated in multiple ways. And of course, as I noted before, the bulldozer is just one strand in this broader spatial infrastructure of dispossession and the broader complex of empire that stands on which all this hinges. And here I'm reminded of a quote by Arundhati Roy on the need to shatter the legitimacy of empire. Our strategy should not only be to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, to mock it with our art, our music, our literature, our stubbornness, our joy, our brilliance, our sheer relentlessness, and our ability to tell our own stories, stories that are different from the ones we're being brainwashed to believe. This, I think, quote, is a significant reminder, of the different modes that we ourselves could be advocating, and that many in the global north are advocating. And here, I just wanted to point to examples of some advocacy initiatives that are working alongside Palestinian-led groups. And these are just some of the examples of the forms. I know everyone is familiar with boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and so I won't go into that, but there's been a lot of movement in relation to arms embargo campaigns. There was unsuccessfully, but an attempt to pass the No More Loopholes Act to ensure that arms embargo works both ways. It's not just purchasing, for instance, from Israel, but also sending parts, even indirectly, via the US, for instance. Significantly, there's been some recent initiative to also think about links in current efforts underway to stop Bill C-5. I don't know if people are familiar with Bill C-5, but, with the pretense of trying to build up the Canadian economy, there's a ramming through of a lot of development projects, and ramming it through on Indigenous lands without the proper consent, prior and informed consent, and some of that has to do with critical minerals, accessing critical minerals, and the critical minerals are being used in arms production. This is the case, for instance, with regards to, maybe we could talk a bit more about that later, but I know at least one mining company in Quebec that's being supported by General Dynamics. Its land division, and General Dynamics is also shipping parts to the US that's used in arms that's being shipped to Israel. Anyway, so there's all these webs of kind of entanglements involved. There's also been the emergence of a number of neighborhood committees that have formed. I know here in Toronto, there's Davenport for Palestine is one example. We had various of these committees as well, like Outremont for Palestine, and these different kinds of committees mobilize at a highly localized level, but they do a lot of things like building awareness, education campaigns, direct actions sometimes. I mean, there's been the occupation of different elected officials' offices and demos that might be neighborhood-based as well as city-based and other things. Also going to some of these arms facilities, right? And blocking some of the entrances and so forth. So those are some of the campaigns and direct actions. There's also research organizations that are looking at the implications of companies or investments in the global north in the military industry complex as well. So these are just a couple examples. And then I used just again, example of Just Peace Advocates, which is a solidarity organization that's done a lot of research, communication, education, advocacy. So basically what I'm trying to say is that you can see here an extension of planning, of the resistance planning that can be multi-sited, right? That occurs in other sites and sites that are, potentially implicated. And as one really, critical example or reminder, of course, were the encampments. And I know that Majd and Deb have written on the Toronto encampment and the ways in which community was formed there and the networks of solidarity and resistance. And so I think there are interesting parallels. And I'm very close to ending. It's my last slide. And I'll just say Such forms of mobilization can be considered not only a form of solidarity, but responsibility. Geographer Doreen Massey introduced the concept, geographies of responsibility, to challenge the notion that empire just acts outward on faraway lands. It prompts us to recognize that empire itself is constituted by global flows and connections, people and resources that underlie both the spatial and social divides here, as in the case of the settler colonial project here on Turtle Island, or the longstanding oppression of people of color or non-status migrants, as well as there. It is particularly a responsibility for those of us within empire residing in countries that prop up the military industry complex, supplying, funding, providing political cover for bulldozer colonial planning. This positioning obliges us to act, to end the attacks on the camps and across Palestine, and, as I can add, Lebanon, Iran, and so many other places more generally. And ultimately, to eliminate the need for refugee camps altogether. Thank you.